So thank you, welcome, welcome, welcome. In true COSEM fashion, we are going to take a moment to center ourselves with a mindfulness moment and a short activity. So just please take a deep breath, maybe close your eyes. And just take a moment to honor the stillness. Knowing that this could be the middle, towards the end of your day, or even the end of your day. Just taking a moment to pause. And taking a moment to send out lots of positivity, maybe with a smile, out into your space and your environment. And just imagine that as you bring a smile to your face, you are sending out kindness and appreciation to everyone and everything around you. And then letting that smile fill with extra goodness for yourself. And grateful for yourself. And softly releasing the smile just a bit. And feeling whole and perfect and complete. So we are really thrilled to have the wonderful Linda Ryden with us today for our August equity-based conversation as part of our series. Linda Ryden is the creator of the Peace of Mind program, a cutting-edge combination of mindfulness, social-emotional learning, neuroscience, and conflict resolution. Linda is also the author of the Peace of Mind curriculum series and of 4 children's books published by Tilbury House. As the full-time peace teacher at Lafayette Elementary School, a public school in Washington, D.C., she teaches peace classes to more than 700 children every single week. Linda is the co-director of Peace of Mind Incorporated, which is a nonprofit dedicated to creating and advocating for mindfulness-based SEL programs. Linda, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tovi. It's so great to be with you and Tracy. I was saying that you guys were some of the last people outside of my family that I saw before quarantine, so it's nice to see you again.
Definitely feels good to connect. And we all met and connected at our annual conference, our annual Educating Mindfully conference in Chicago. And that was back in February. So, you know, the world did change quite a bit after we left there. So, and for those of you who are possibly new to this series, this is a space where we bring in people of all races who are contributing to equity-based mindfulness, equity-based SEL, and equity-based conversations that are happening in education around our work. And sometimes bringing those conversations in also doesn't necessarily look like it's perfect, because this work is not perfect work. So we honor the struggles in this work, we honor the growth in this work, and we honor the courageous people who are taking charge and leading in this work. And as Brene Brown likes to say, sometimes when we fall in the arena, what does that look like when we're getting back up? But when we're in the arena, we will fall. When we're in the arena, we will struggle. And it allows us to be vulnerable and to also inspire and motivate others. So I was really intrigued and touched on the heart level when I reached out to Linda about being a guest, and she named that she was struggling to create an anti-racist curriculum for her students for this next school year. And I thought, you know, that's a beautiful thing to message and to share, because teachers all over the nation, all over the world, are looking ahead in terms of how can we be better allies? How can we create anti-racist curriculum that benefits all children? And so when we get to that piece in our talk, Linda's going to share a little bit about that process for her and what that's been like. And before we get to that, I have, you know, my favorite question that I ask everyone, which is really, can you share with us what your mindfulness practice is? What is that like for you?
Sure. So let's see, I think I started practicing mindfulness about 10 years ago. And I really started because I thought it was something that my students needed to learn. I wasn't as convinced that it was going to be so good for me, but it turned out to be like the best thing I could do for myself. During my normal life, when I go to school every day, I would normally practice in the morning. But now that I'm home, I kind of find different times during the day to practice. And I really like to do a lot of different things, but I like to use the 10% Happier app. That's my favorite set of teachers and practices. And I've also been learning about Qigong, which is a Chinese sort of energy flowing practice, kind of like Tai Chi. And my son, who's living here, who just graduated from college, he's actually studying to be a Qigong teacher now. And so we've been practicing together, and he's been teaching me. And it's been a wonderful way to practice and also to bond with him. We just did some before we came up here. So
it is really powerful. I've been exposed to it on a meditation retreat, and it's a wonderful practice.
It is. It's a beautiful practice, and it's very feels wonderful, but it's not hard. Like, it's not like, I'm not very flexible, so yoga has always been hard for me, and Qigong is not, and it just feels great. But I do feel like I get some of the benefits of yoga.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Have you found out that you like meditating at a certain time of day better? Like, I just love it in the morning when I'm super fresh, but I too, with the quarantine, I'm like, I can meditate almost anytime throughout the day, just about.
Yeah. I've been trying out different times. I tend to get too sleepy in the afternoon, but but yeah, morning and before bed, I really like. I'm missing though, practicing with my students, like that, because I teach, full time. And so every 45 minutes, I have a new group of kids and we're practicing. And even though I'm not really in the practice with them exactly, because I'm watching and teaching, I just miss that connection and that feeling. And when I'm teaching, it just brings me into the moment so much more than sometimes even when I'm practicing by myself, when I can get distracted. I just, I miss that feeling of really being in that flow. And I miss my kids a lot.
Absolutely. And they make it so much more worth it in so many ways. Someone is asking us in the chat if we could spell Qigong.
Oh yeah, it's Qigong.
Thank you so much. So in terms of equity and keeping us in a space of racial healing as we're going through all the civil unrest and whatnot, how have you been growing yourself in the work of racial healing and equity work? How are you doing that, particularly as a white woman in the United States?
Yeah. Well, the most recent thing I did was take Tovi's wonderful course, Racial Healing Allies, which was a 4-week course where we did some work on our own. We did live classes, and we did work with a small group, and that was really wonderful. And it was I've done a lot of different kinds of trainings. We used to call them diversity trainings, and that evolution. But and I've had some really good experiences and some not good experiences. But this the experience I had with with you and Grace and Sally was really different and wonderful, because it was really focused on the inner work, and not the, you can read books to get a lot of the information that you need, but to really have that time to focus on how you're feeling about things, and also really having a chance to talk to other people that you don't know. I've always done this work in a workplace setting, and it's, it can be kind of fraught to be having like these challenging conversations with your coworkers, and you don't really know where they are in their, journey on this. And so it was, and a lot of the times not everybody wants to be doing the work, so it's hard. Right. And so it was wonderful to be with a group of people who really wanted to be there, and but that I didn't know. And so it was a different experience, kind of talking about some of the content we were reading and about our own personal experiences. It was good practice for talking with people. And I hadn't really had an experience before of like being in a white affinity space. And that sort of coincidentally kind of happened the way that I was broken out into groups. And so that was new for me. So that was great. And I think it's not too late to sign up for, you're doing it again, right?
Yeah, we're doing another one, and today is the last day to sign up. So if anyone is interested, today is that day.
Yeah, we'll do it. It's really very worthwhile. Very worthwhile.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, I've been doing, like I said, I've been doing a lot of this work for a long time, but it's always changing. And I was trying to think before we were talking, I was trying to think of like when I think my first realization about racism and my role at like having a role in like doing something about it. I remember when I was about 9 years old, I lived on the south side of Chicago, and Jesse Jackson came to my school and did an assembly, and it was really like a call to action, like for us to be part of his movement and to be part of the racial justice movement. And he was Jesse Jackson, so it was amazing. And I felt, I just was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to be part of this. And I remember he had us chant, I am somebody over and over again. And I even like at that age, I kind of remember thinking, he's talking to me, but he's also not really talking to me, because there were I could see on the faces of a lot of my Black classmates that they were having a different experience with it than I was. And I was just like, okay. Like, so I kind of feel like looking back, I was like, oh yeah, I had a different role to play, and that message had a different meaning for me, I think.
And that's a beautiful sharing. And it also, for me, highlights that our kids know. Like, no matter the age, like we think this is above them or they're knowledgeable, but intuitively our kids know. And intuitively our kids are more connected in so many ways that their conditioning hasn't taken over enough because they're so young that we haven't had a chance to, in a sense, condition them out of deep connection, condition them out of the knowingness of even difference, but in the spirit of supporting that difference and being inclusive. Yeah. Before we get to your mini lesson, I really want to highlight one of the things that you said and ask you. You said how there are some people that don't want to do this work. And I know that you're referring to racial healing work. And I'm going to assume that you're really naming white people. Mm-hmm. What is the impact in our schools and classrooms when white people opt out of doing their work? How does that impact our schools and classrooms from your perspective?
I mean, I feel like it should be a requirement. I mean, I just don't feel like in this day and age, especially when, you know, the majority of public school teachers are white and the majority of public school students are not. I think that, you know, like it should be like we have to be licensed. We have to have all these, you know, things that we know how to do. And to, we had Ibram X. Kendi did this plenary talk this morning for our Summer Learning Institute, and he was so amazing. And he said, when you're hiring, you should say to somebody, why do you think that Black preschoolers get in trouble more than white preschoolers? And if the candidate can't answer that question, then don't hire them. You know, and I mean, like, I think it's that important. And that's really why I'm doing this work, because I don't feel like I'm worthy to stand in front of my students if I haven't done my own work, and I'm not at least somewhat fluent, you know, in talking about, you know, when like I said, when I was growing up, like people didn't talk about it. And I was seeing racism all the time. I was experiencing white privilege at my high school, where there weren't that many white people at my high school. And I was definitely experiencing white privilege because I was treated differently, and the expectations for me were different, right? But nobody was talking about it. And it was really confusing and painful. So I feel like I'm doing my kids a big favor by saying like, we're just going to talk about this, you know, just the way, you know, you want to talk about sex with kids, so they're not all like confused. Like, we got to talk about these things.
That's right. That's right.
You know,
and it reminds me too that when I used to do hiring, I would ask an equity-based question, and it would be astounding to me how people, particularly white teachers, would not be able to even name race. Like, the question is about race.
Yeah.
And if you can't even say it and respond with the same language I even asked the question for, yep. I'm like, you're not ready to have a race-based conversation. Like, the fragility is that strong and that ingrained that you think you can't discuss it in an interview to be at a school where you're not going to be teaching any white kids.
Right.
And so if you can't talk about race, how can you do the work?
Right.
It's an integral part of our work, and even talking about the demographic data, and it's just so much. And so just even normalizing the conversation around race is just utterly critical. So thank you for that. And let's move into your mini lesson. Let's do it.
Awesome. I'm gonna share my screen. I'll see if I can do this. Okay. I'm getting better at technology, but it's not my thing.
Everyone's gotten so patient with it. It's all good. We trust you.
That's good. I appreciate patience. All right. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
All right. Beautiful. Okay, let's see if I can move my slides. Yes. All right. I want to give a little shout out to Stacy Beck. She's a parent at my school, and she took a lot of these pictures of my students, and it just makes me happy to see them. Mm-hmm. So just for a little background, I began teaching conflict resolution in my peace classes back in 2003. And I quickly realized that my students weren't able to use the skills that we practiced in class when it really mattered. Most of them just didn't know how to calm down enough in order to put their conflict resolution skills to work. And so when I sort of learned about mindfulness, I started to bring it into my classroom. I started to teach a little basic neuroscience, and really everything changed. And I was able to teach about conflict resolution and social emotional learning in a way that was a lot deeper and more effective. And this work has really been transformative for my students and for my school. And it led us, my partner Cheryl Dodwell and I, to write the Peace of Mind curriculum series, and then to start our nonprofit organization, Peace of Mind, to share this work with other educators. And so when I talk about my work, that's usually what I'm talking about, really about how mindfulness and neuroscience have really dramatically changed how I teach. And I've focused mostly on the breathing practices and the brain science. But today I really want to focus on two really important other skills that we can develop through a mindfulness practice. And those are metacognition and compassion. And I'll talk about how those two are really key to teaching kids about racial justice. Oops. I'll get better at this. So like I said earlier, I didn't start out as a meditator. And one of the reasons that I resisted was because I thought that, that mindfulness was all about clearing your mind, right? Like most people do. And as I'm sure you all know, it's actually quite the opposite, right? It's more about metacognition, or thinking about thinking, as I say with my students, noticing your thoughts. And through mindfulness practice, we can really notice how our mind is always flitting around and finding new things to think about. The way I describe it for my students is that it's almost like you have a remote control in your brain, and you can choose a certain channel, but your brain might just suddenly change the channel and you might not even notice it, and you just start watching that channel. So mindfulness really helps us to get better at noticing what's happening in our brains, and then get more intentional about what we want to be thinking about. And having that ability to notice what your mind is doing and make a choice about what you want to do is really liberating. So right now, you know, clearly our country is in the midst of two pandemics. We have the pandemic of COVID-19, and we have the pandemic of systemic racism. And we're, as a country, we're simultaneously in quarantine and taking to the streets in huge demonstrations for racial justice. So our country and our world is really at a crossroads. And I really believe that mindfulness can be a powerful tool to help us to find our way. During this time of anxiety over COVID-19, we can use mindful breathing practices to help us deal with fear and anxiety. We can use metacognition skills to help us notice when we're walking around in a fog of worry and make a different choice. And those skills have really helped my students during this time. And I made a whole bunch of videos to help them remember how to use their mindfulness practices, to help them when they're afraid or anxious. And those are all available for free on our website. So if you are teaching virtually and you want to use any of those, you're welcome to them. But mindfulness can also really be an important tool to use to deal with the structural challenges in our schools and in our communities and our country, including systemic racism. So metacognition skills can help us to investigate our own thoughts in order to help to uncover and challenge and face our own implicit or unconscious bias. And we all have those. We all have implicit or unconscious bias. It's passed on from our families and through the culture. And we're not responsible for having this bias. We didn't choose it, but it is our responsibility to reckon with it. And we can only do that if we know that it's there. Now, James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And through mindfulness practice, we're able to start to see what we're thinking about other people and ourselves. And we can start to wonder, like, why do I feel this way? And where does this feeling come from? Where did I hear these stories? Mm-hmm. And then to really challenge that, like, is this how I really feel? And then what can I do about it? So these metacognitive skills can help us to face these implicit biases. And therefore, that's some of the most important tools that we can develop with our mindfulness practice. So metacognition is really an important and useful skill. And there's research showing that it can be really helpful in rooting out, reckoning with, and rethinking our implicit bias. But there's another mindfulness practice that's really, I think, just as important in supporting this work. And that's one that Tovi, you embody and teach so beautifully. And that's the practice of compassion. And compassion is crucial in creating the feeling of goodwill toward other people, in creating a classroom community where students feel comfortable to be honest and vulnerable. And it's crucial for helping us deal with the soul-crushing reality of racism and white supremacy. So we've been working on this curriculum for a few years now, and we piloted this curriculum in a middle school that just opened last year. And in this curriculum, we're focusing on compassion practices that can help our students be more gentle with each other during the process of learning and unlearning that's so necessary to equity work. So the metacognition and the compassion practices are really woven throughout the curriculum. But, oops, we have to do our own work first. And like I said, I feel like it's one of the most important things that I can do as a teacher is to be comfortable talking about racism and to talk about race and to talk about white supremacy. All of us, but especially white people, really have to get comfortable with these concepts. We have to learn the history that isn't in our textbooks. Systemic racism really hurts all of us, and we have to make sure that we're not inadvertently passing it on to our students. So Dina Simmons is one of the most important thinkers out there, I think, and she is really pointing out some of the challenges of social emotional learning in terms of systemic racism. She says that everyone wants to be trauma informed, but that the main thing we have to be informed about, and our kids have to be informed about, is the cause of much of the trauma that our kids are experiencing. She argues that we can't just give kids the skills to cope with trauma. We need to recognize and call out the cause of trauma, to recognize and call out systemic racism and white supremacy. And so sometimes when we focus on things like grit or growth mindset or resilience or even mindfulness, without this context, the message we might be sending our students is that they are the problem and that they are what needs to be fixed rather than these systems. So even with really well-intended SEL and mindfulness programs, she says we could harm our students if we aren't being honest about the world that we are living in. So we have to be careful about our language, our policies, our attitudes, so make sure that we're not perpetuating this system that is already stacked against our students of color. So this is another reason why it's so critical for us to do our own work first. And I just wanted to highlight this, this video of these three amazing thinkers, Dr. Bettina Love, Dina Simmons, and Goldie Muhammad. I really highly recommend that everybody, especially teachers, but everybody watch the video of this panel discussion that happened in June about abolitionist teaching. And if you're not inspired to revolutionize education after you hear these amazing women talk, like, I don't know what would convince you. I learned so much from this. I watched it like 4 times. Everybody's seen all the book lists, right? These are some of the books that I found helpful. Some of the resources that are out there. And I want to do yet another plug for Tovi's course, because it's just really wonderful and powerful. And I think it's really important not to just read books. I like to read books and I like to read articles, and I like to have the information, but you can't just read one book and say, okay, I understand, and start teaching. Like, you really got to read a lot of different perspectives, and then you got to take the time to kind of process it and talk about it and think about how it affects you personally from where you're coming from in your own racial experience. So, find what's good for you. Those are some of the books that I've liked.
And I just want to name that when you're aware of your own racialized lens, and this is just a teachable moment, you had every option to go ahead and make this list alphabetical. And I am willing to bet that you were very intentional about not listing the white author first.
Yep.
And that's the kind of things, that's why I'm even calling this out right now. That's the kind of difference it makes when teachers carry a lens that's culturally inclusive. That, yeah, we're going to break a rule so that we're not highlighting, in a sense, whiteness in a space around this particular talk even. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we move from beyond and highlight, and in a sense is share the mic, share the space,
Yeah.
and uplift the people of color who have been contributing to this work for a long time.
Right.
And Robin DiAngelo is very intentional about that. And yet at the same time, I'm just loving the fact that, again, you know, it could have been alphabetical and it wasn't. And I know that you were intentional about that because you have a lens that has shifted in that way to make that important. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. And, you know, it's growing, right?
Yeah.
And I just, I'm just going to quickly go over a little bit about what's in the curriculum, but I just want to like really, again, mention that I'm really presenting all of these ideas with great humility. I mean, I am not an expert in racial justice in any way, but I really want to honor the teachers who've helped me, including some of the people here and many others, including Tovi and Grace and Sally, who led the beautiful Racial Healing Allies course. I also want to honor the people who have forgiven me for making mistakes and who continue to forgive me for making mistakes, including some of my students, and to continue to like kind of support me as I try to do this work. So I just want to give just a really quick overview of the curriculum. This is a curriculum that is coming out of several years of experimenting in my classroom. And I'm really lucky that I have a lot of autonomy in my school because I created the curriculum that I teach. And I wish every teacher had the autonomy that I have. And so I've been able to try things out, and you know, some things have not worked, not been good. And some things have, and I've been it's a work in process, but I'm thankful to the students and the teachers who've given me a little freedom to try and see what works. Because I really kind of found, unfortunately, that when we started doing Black Lives Matter Week of Action at our school about 3 years ago, and there was not a lot of good lessons out there. And some of the things that I found and that were given to us, I thought were ended up kind of being a bit traumatizing for some of my students of color. And so I've been trying very hard to think about how to do this work that is honest and truthful, but not harmful. And it's a fine line. One thing I do want to just say, I wasn't planning to say this, but one thing I've learned from my sister, she's got a PhD in media literacy and rhetoric. And one thing she says is that the visual trumps the verbal. So if you're doing a lesson and you want to talk about stereotypes, which I do a lot in this curriculum, don't show pictures of the negative stereotypes, even if you're saying these are terrible things, because what people will take away is what they saw. And so, and there's a lot of that out there on the internet. And so like really beware of that kind of teaching. It can be dangerous. So like I said, I'm starting with the mindfulness, because this is a mindfulness-based curriculum. The mindfulness is the foundation. And so the remote controlled breathing, which is what I kind of call that noting practice, and the compassion practices are woven throughout. And it really helps to bring that sort of sense of gentleness that we need to have with each other when we're doing difficult work and having uncomfortable conversations. We start out talking about identity, and when you're talking about race and racism, it's really important for students to have a sense of their own identity, and it's important to have a sense of how your identity can be shaped by the culture that you live in and what your relationship is to the dominant culture in your wherever you live and in our country. So in these lessons, we talk about race, we talk about how and why the concept of race was created. We talk about the concept of whiteness. We talk about white privilege. And these identity maps are like a great starting point for that discussion. One of the foundations of our curriculum is the think test. And this is just a concept that I came up with that helps kids to think and before they speak and decide if what they want to say is true, helpful, necessary, and kind. I'm sure you've seen that quote before. And I wrote a book about this called Taisha Uses the Think Test. And that's Taisha there holding her book. And all my books are based on and feature real students from my classroom. And so I just wanted to include Taisha because she's so great. Then, I'm trying to go fast, I'm sorry. We don't just talk about racial equity in the curriculum. This intersectionality is so important to understand. So we're also address gender equity, body size, bias, and other kinds of equity issues. In the lessons about gender stereotypes, we are again just trying to get kids comfortable with talking about terms that they might not be familiar with, like you know, the gender spectrum or gender fluidity or non-binary. We had a student last year whose parent was transgender, and so she came in and talked to the kids about what that means, and you know, we just want people to understand, like, there's a whole spectrum of people, and we want to and so in the curriculum, I want to just try to introduce that and then really talk about some of the really insidious gender-related stereotypes that we have in our culture. We talk a lot in the curriculum about implicit or unconscious bias. And we talk about the meaning of bias, and we talk about discrimination. We really draw on our mindfulness practices to help us to notice these biases within ourselves. We also use embodiment practices to help explore what it feels like in our bodies to feel bias or to be on the receiving end of bias. And once we have used our metacognitive skills to start to recognize our biases, then the next step is to try to reprogram our minds by replacing harmful stereotypes with counter stereotypic images. So we do this through making digital collages or posters or songs or poems or raps or anything that gives the kids a chance to sort of challenge the stereotypes with these contradictory positive messages. And then we have lessons about what you can do to take action, to stand up for yourself or to stand up for other people and to interrupt bias when you hear it and when you see it. And so we do that through role playing and skits. And finally, we take action. We help our students learn about history and privilege and identity by making it personal. So at our school this winter, I had read that local historians had learned that the very land that our school and the adjacent park and rec center had been built on, that land had been stolen by the government from Black people in the 1930s. So we invited the historians who uncovered this history, and we invited descendants of the original owners of the land to visit our school and to talk to our kids about what happened. And my students were really moved by this story. And so they started a letter writing campaign to our mayor and the city council to demand that the recreation center be renamed for the original owner of the land and that reparations be made to his family. And I hesitated to put this in the curriculum because I thought, well, this is sort of specific. But then I thought, like, unfortunately, it would be pretty easy for educators in every part of the country to find stories that are similar to these, whether it be land stolen from people who were formerly enslaved or from indigenous people. So we're kind of encouraging teachers and students to look at what's happening right now and look at where they live and see the legacy of enslavement, the legacy of colonization, the legacy of white supremacy, and take some action so they don't feel kind of burdened down by just like, the knowledge. I want them to have a chance to feel like they can do something. So
for one
Yeah.
second, Linda? I really think I want to capture your courage to do the taking action piece. And can you kind of share what it was like for you to be bold enough, I guess, in this particular aspect? Like, what was it in you that was able to make this part of the move?
Well, I just really felt like we, again, like we can't just make it all intellectual. Like it really needs to be real. I was worried that people in the neighborhood would be bothered, like it's not, it's ugly history, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, the kids they're just so inspiring. Like they just they were just so outraged when they heard this, and when they were talking to this lovely man who talked about like what his family lost in terms of money, certainly, but in terms of their family connection. I mean, they had been like all living in this compound of houses, and then they just were spread. And he didn't even know. I mean, he was contacted by these historians. He didn't even know about this history. And the man who originally owned the land turned out to be a historic figure. There was even a exhibit about him in this museum along the Potomac River. And he had no idea that he was related to this, it just, I'm not a historian, but I just felt like, wow, and it's right under us, exactly where we were, And so the kids were really, really moved, and they wrote beautiful letters. And they were supposed to go testify in city council, and then we went into quarantine. And so that was a lost opportunity. But a lot of things are happening. I mean, they're now planning to rename the high school that is also built on the land that was stolen, because it's currently named after Woodrow Wilson. And so there's a move to change the name. We're kind of hoping for John Lewis High School.
Nice.
So I just have one more slide. This is a quote from Bettina Love, who I mentioned earlier. She's an amazing writer and scholar. And she says, "To love all children, we must struggle together to create the schools we are taught to believe are impossible. Schools built on justice and love and joy and anti-racism." And I just like, that is like that's my dream. And for me, as a white teacher, it would be all too easy for me to avoid these difficult topics. I mean, people were not clamoring, saying, "Oh, you got to talk about racism in peace class." But I really believe, I've been hearing and seeing protest signs that say silence is violence. And I really believe that. And so I had to find my voice. And I really encourage all of you, if you haven't found yours, find it now, because we need it. We need to hear it. And we just hope with great humility that these lessons and the incorporating mindfulness into this work will be helpful and help teachers on their journey to becoming anti-racist educators. And that's, being anti-racist is something that we have to do minute by minute, right? It's not something you claim to be, right? It's something that you do and you don't do, and then you do, So we're just trying to help with that. And so these are some ways to reach us. The curriculum will be available in just a couple of weeks. It's at the designer right now. This curriculum was written for middle school. I've adapted the lessons for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. So I'm working on the little kids, but we wanted to get these out as quickly as possible. So if you want to join our mailing list, we'll let you know when the curriculum's available. And I hope you'll take a look. And one of the reasons I wanted to put my contact info here is that I really want to hear from people, but I also want to learn from people. So, if you're out there and you're doing work that you want to share, like I want to know about it, Peace of Mind wants to share that work. You know, I just want the work to get better. So yeah, so I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk about it and share. I'm excited.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us and for being on the front end in a sense of answering the call to create anti-racist curriculum and how to start to weave that into the fabric. Like, hopefully it won't be such a thing to have anti-racist curriculum anymore. It'll just be the way our curriculum is. Like,
Yeah.
That's where we're heading.
Exactly.
It's going to take us some time to get there, but definitely, you know, just lovely to see this contribution from you. And of course, so timely. James Butler's even saying, you know, thanks for sharing your experience and wisdom. And Harriet Gold is saying that she's thankful and she thinks it's time for all of us to find our voice. So for you to really stress that. Someone put a fabulous quote in here too, that SEL without an equity lens is white supremacy with a hug.
Yes.
That's a quote by Dina Simmons as well.
Yeah.
So Nancy Reese is saying you are a true hero. So thank you for that. So folks, we're going to open it up. I'm going to stop talking and we're opening it up for a few questions. So if you have any questions, you can type in the chat. That'll be great.
Yeah, that quote from Dina Simmons, that you know, white supremacy with a hug, that when I read that a year or so ago, that was just like a gut punch. I was just like, oh God, you know, oh my God. So then I was just like, God, am I doing that? You know, and really that made me just have to stop and look at everything.
Exactly. It is. It really is.
Yeah.
Question, has there been any pullback or pushback maybe from the Board of Education around this?
Not yet. No. I don't think there would be in DC, but you know, that's why it was kind of hard to write the lessons. I mean, you know, when I told you I was struggling, because I was thinking about all the people all over the country. You know, here it's not. I mean, I've done some things in my classroom that were, you know, like a bit radical, and I've had, you know, one or two kids' parents complain, but I, you know, when I was in your course and I was meeting people all over the country and hearing about, you know, what they were dealing with, I thought, oh, this is going to be a heavy lift for some teachers. But then I thought, well, you know, I mean, I didn't want to pull back and I didn't want to soften the edges. You know, I figure like it's just truth. It's not, I mean, it's not my opinion. I mean, these are like facts. And, so but this is why, again, why I keep saying, like, people have to do their own work, because you've got to be ready to defend it, and you've got to be ready to deal with whatever people are going to say to you, and you got to know your own community.
Absolutely. What do you feel like was your biggest blind spot in creating this curriculum? I mean, because you are relating it a lot to doing your own work. So what was kind of that, like, ooh, like, I'm so glad I woke up to this, or what came that like hit you like a ton of bricks or whatever? What was that for you?
Oh, such a good question. I feel like there were so many. I think partly because I was so worried about how white teachers would react, or the challenges that white teachers might have. We were reading through kind of a almost final version, and Cheryl Dodwell, who's the executive director of Peace of Mind, and she's edited and co-authored this curriculum, you know, and she was like, I feel like we maybe want to look back again and just read it and think about, you know, if I was a Black teacher reading this, like, am I going to feel like this is for me? And so we did. We kind of went back and thought about it and added some things, changed some language, but it was, you know, it was almost like an overcorrection. We were trying so hard to think like, okay, who's going to have the hardest time with this? But it's not. It's hard for everybody, and everybody has to do their work. So everybody's work is different, but everybody has to do some work to get ready to talk about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Someone is asking, around, do you have any favorite books for a mindfulness journey where she's going to be homeschooling, what she's calling unschooling, and they're going to start each day with a mind-body class for pre-K through first grade. So while you think about what a favorite book could be, I do want to name that James Butler, also COSEM member, has curriculum designed for the younger ones too, like the pre-K and the K as well. And he has a strong curriculum there. Is there something you can recommend for that age group?
My students really liked Alpha Breaths. I think it's Daniel Rechtschaffen book, where there's a different mindfulness practice for every letter of the alphabet. I have 4 books that I wrote that I like, and
share them, please. Go for it.
Yeah. I have Rosie's Brain, and that book it teaches kids about the 3 parts of the brain that are most involved with when you get angry. So the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. And it teaches kids, it's through a story about a little girl who gets angry with her mother and, flips her lid, and she runs up to her room, and she actually meets those 3 parts of her brain who are personified, and they remind her about mindfulness practices that she can use. And we actually just published that one in Spanish too.
Oh, great.
So really excited about that. And another book is called Henry is Kind, and that features the heartfulness practice, the compassion practice, and it's a book about kindness and about how that's actually a story that came out right out of my classroom, where I was having kids share kind things that they had done. And there was one boy in the class who was like, oh, I didn't do anything, I'm not kind. And then everybody else in the class started naming kind things that he had done. And it was just so moving. And so that's what Henry is Kind is about. And then I wrote a book called Sergio Sees the Good. And that is a book that talks about the negativity bias in the brain, and about how gratitude and sort of looking for all the good little things in your life can really change your brain, and it can change the way you see your life. And then the book that I mentioned earlier, Taisha, uses a think test. So so I recommend those.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. And Shaka Colstock is just naming that she's just appreciating that you were starting this process around having an anti-racist curriculum in time for the school year to begin, and that people will have a resource in this way. And Veronica is also thanking you for sharing the curriculum and your experience. So you're getting lots of appreciation for both your books and also this lesson, and for your time today. So thank you so much. Any closing thought before we wrap?
I guess I would just say, like, don't be afraid, right? Like, you mentioned Brene Brown earlier, and I've been thinking a lot about Brene Brown and about about vulnerability, and how you just can't do work, and you can't, and about racism without vulnerability, and you have to be willing to be wrong and learn and start again. And so I think that I think a lot of teachers, and especially I think a lot of teachers who teach mindfulness, are very sensitive, thoughtful people, and we don't like to hurt people's feelings, and we don't like to say the wrong thing. And I really beat myself up whenever I feel like I've done some harm to somebody. And so the idea of kind of doing, putting out a curriculum that people might be offended by, or they might not agree with, or they might think I didn't do it well enough, or they wish I wasn't doing it at all, or all these different things was bothering me. And then I just decided, like, just to let it go. Like, it's just, looking at the world we're in right now, I'm like, who cares? It's not about me, it's about us. And it's about, like you said this, Tovi, in our last class, that we're doing this work for humanity, Like, I mean, you know, I feel like we're doing this for all the children. Like the time is now. Like we got to change the world, and the time is now. So doing my little part.
Well, it's a big part. So thank you. Thank you, Linda. We just so appreciate you and for taking the time today to bless us with your learnings and your unlearnings and your teaching. So I'm excited about what the school year will hold with all of its uncertainty, just knowing that people are starting to reconnect to social emotional learning and reconnect to mindfulness and reconnect to resilience building, all with an equity lens. Matters. It makes a difference. And it's going to be one of the most challenging school years we've had, I'm sure, for its own unique ways of the other pandemic. And so we just really thank you for offering support to the field, offering support to of your work. So thank you so much. And before we close out, COSEM family, Facebook guests, everyone, I want to be sure that I'm going to announce the new upcoming guests for September, so be ready for that. But right before I do that, you should see my screen. Tracy, can you see on how to support and grow COSEM? Is that what's being shown?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just remember, you can commit to 1%, starting with you, 10 minutes a day, supporting the book. We have this awesome book, 40 different stories, 40 different success stories and strategies for bringing school transformation through mindfulness. How is this possible? How is it working? From people that have been in the field for over 2 decades to people who've just been in the field for 3 years. Consider starting a COSEM chapter or practice group for your teachers, school community, community center. It's so easy to do. Tracy and the team have a plug and play like way to start up a COSEM chapter so that we can really start transforming ourselves and transforming our systems through educating mindfully. Please donate to COSEM. This call, these things that we do for free. There's a donate button on our website on educatingmindfully.org. So please use that donate button. And then lastly, do your work. No matter what, do your work. The second cohort of Racial Healing Allies is starting on Wednesday, and the last day to register is tonight. It's absolutely tonight. And a percentage goes to COSEM from every single cohort. And lastly, our guest for next month on September 15th is our very own James Butler, who works at Austin School District. He's a teacher there and was also named Teacher of the Year by the district. So he's written a mindfulness curriculum for elementary schools called Mindful Classrooms, the Educator Guide, and it's all about daily 5-minute practices to support social emotional learning, grades pre-K through 5. So it's an amazing resource. We really hope that you'll join us on September 15th. Tracy will open up the link for registration for that in the coming days, but there's plenty of time to register. So she'll probably do it next week. No, I'm just going to give her a little bit of an out. Won't be this week. It is summertime still. So please consider joining us in September for our next conversation and joining us with James Butler. And again, just absolutely thank you for this experience. And Linda, thank you again for your time today. Tracy, anything that you want to close us out with?
I just want to share that we'll be, this recording will be on our website, and I'll also put the webinar that Peace of Mind did for COSEM last year. I'll put that up on the website as well. Linda just did a keynote for the National Summit on Revolutionizing Education. I think she has that up on her website. That's definitely an inspirational one to check out. She wrote chapter 33 for our book, the Educating Mindfully book. I know I always get this question, Linda, are you going to share your slides, or I don't know, it doesn't matter, but if you do share your slides, I'll put them up on.
Yeah, they're mostly just pictures. I'm not very good at slides.
Okay.
But,
so we won't worry about slides. If you want to learn more about our chapters and getting a chapter started, we have a meeting tomorrow evening, and the link for that is on our homepage at educatingmindfully.org.
Great.
And that's it. That's all I had to share.
That's what we got, folks. So last comment basically was thank you so much. This was amazingly helpful in focusing the SEL and equity work. So thank you. And then accolades are just coming in on there on the chat. So thank you again. Thank you again. And thank you everyone who tuned in to listen to this wonderful talk. And we'll see you in September. All right. Take good care.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Linda.
Bye. So nice to see you both. Thanks, everybody.